Here at McDonough Law, we are here to help our clients navigate tough legal issues with smart, creative solutions that help our clients know that they've got us on their side. And when it comes to farm and ranch succession planning, we really take the time to listen to what your goals are and what your issues are, understand your operations, so that we can help come up with the best plan for passing down the farm and ranch business down to the next generation. I understand that firsthand. My grandparents owned a farm in western Nebraska, and part of that land was homesteaded, so there was a lot of emotion and pride and heritage tied with our farm. My grandpa loved it with all of his heart. It was his pride and joy. He used to take me out in the pickup truck and take me along the section roads and drive and explain all the history of the farm to me. He loved it. I suspect that that's probably not anything different than what other farmers and ranchers feel about their operations and their farms and ranches that they've built. You put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into that farm and into that operation, and you want to make sure that it's protected, and you want to make sure that when it's passed down to the next generation, that your wishes are understood and that those are clear. My grandparents did a really great thing for my family. They put together a trust and had their wishes spelled out very clearly, had all the I's dotted, the T's crossed. It was really a great plan. They had a good succession plan in place, and they had a plan for when they were no longer able to farm, who would take over and how that would go. It really, while it's never easy to go through that, it really made it a lot easier on my family to understand how my grandparents wanted things done. While it's a difficult thing sometimes to do and understand, having gone through it firsthand, I can really appreciate the time and attention to detail and the planning and the thinking through all of the issues that need to be put together to put together a really good farm or ranch succession plan. So with that said, I'm here today to share a little bit about my experiences and to provide some education for anyone out there who is interested in putting together a farm and ranch succession plan. These are not your standard run-of-the-mill trusts or wills. These have to consider a lot of really unique issues that are specific to farms and ranches and your ag business, whether you're raising crops or whether you're raising livestock. There's a lot of issues that go into it, and it's not just the land you have to consider, it's also government programs, loans. You've got the whole business side of a farm and ranch, which involves commodities and leases. You're also dealing with a lot of contracts. There's a lot of complication that goes on with farms and ranches, and we understand that. I understand that firsthand, and many of us at McDonough Law have farm and ranch backgrounds, so we really enjoy working with our clients when they come to us with a need to put together a well thought out plan. So what I'd like to do today is run through some of the issues that come up and some of the things that we do to help our clients plan. What I'd like to do is start off with just a couple of the issues that clients typically will ask us about when they come in the door for the first time. We often hear that our clients are wanting to avoid guardianship and probate. We understand that. That can be an issue for a lot of our clients. They'd like a really smooth transition, and having to have a guardian or go through probate can sometimes complicate that smooth transition. Sometimes we're dealing with second marriage situations, and sometimes we've got divorces or lawsuits, or sometimes we're just simply dealing with trying to protect our children, or maybe we're not sure if our children are ready to inherit a big farm or ranch operation, and we need to put a plan in place. We also hear some concerns about USDA subsidy payments and other government benefit programs. We understand you don't want to disqualify from those. Those are key to a lot of operations, and so we want to make sure that we're understanding what your operations are, how they're being run, which benefits you're using or that you may be in need of in the future, how you're utilizing those so that we can really understand what your needs are and what the best plan would be to make sure that we're protecting those. One thing we hear all the time, I want to keep the family farm forever. Don't sell it. We hear that all the time. And, it's probably, I think it's a credit to our family when we hear that, because they love it. They love what they've built. My grandpa used to say that to me all the time. Never sell the farm. Don't sell the farm. I want you to keep this in the family forever. Because they've really put, my grandpa and my grandmother and their parents before them, they put a lot of their blood, sweat, and tears into that farm. A lot of hard work. My grandpa could take me out in any of the pastures or the wheat fields, and he could give me years and years of details of work that went into that field or work that went into that crop and getting that crop to that point. When we were kids, he used to have us go out and help him pull weeds out in the wheat fields. They paid us a nickel an hour. So we thought when we were kids, we were, rolling in coins at that point. But, those are those are the stories and the memories and the heritage that are built into our family farms. So you can understand when someone comes to us and says, we want to keep the farm in the family. So it's always important to come up with a plan that takes into account those values and the heritage of the patriarchs and the matriarchs of our family. The other thing that we hear is there's some concern over making sure we're treating our kids fairly. And, when we're coming up with that estate plan or that succession plan for a farm or ranch, there might be kids who aren't interested in farming or ranching. There might be others who can't wait to help out and be a part of it. So how do we treat both fairly? If there's multiple children, how are you going to address that? What are your thoughts on that? We've got a lot of ideas on how we can be creative and help come up with some ways to help plan for all of the kids, not just the ones who are taking over the farm. And another concern we hear sometimes is, I don't want to have to liquidate or sell the farm in order to pay for long-term care. That's a big one. People are concerned about that because long-term care is expensive. So we want to make sure that we're considering all of our options when we're putting together our planning, because it's important to understand how long-term care is going to happen. It's not an easy thing to go through. And so the more planned you can be and the more you can have in place to help with that transition, the better. The other issues we hear about are, what about estate taxes? How do I plan for that? What are the ways that we can set up the estate so that we can make the most sense for the plan? And those are the main issues that we hear a lot. And, we talked about some of the government subsidies and programs. Really the two key programs that we really have to consider when we're talking about farm and ranch succession planning are the FSA, Farm Service Agencies subsidy programs, and NRCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Service programs. Those two programs are the ones that we look at the most. We want to make sure that we are considering all the issues that go into that. I won't go into great detail on that in this video, but there are a lot of things that we need to consider. So if you are utilizing any programs within those agencies, then we're going to need to definitely want to take a look at that. And you're going to want to consider, how does that work into your long-term estate plan and your succession plan? Because you don't want to lose those. The other things that we can talk about are, okay, so really, what would a succession plan look like? What are my options? When we're looking at options for farm and ranch succession planning, typically we're considering whether a trust makes sense, whether LLCs might make sense, general partnerships, corporations. Those are some of the kind of the big items that we want to look at. What is the best way to put together that succession plan? Generally, most estate planners who work with farm and ranch clients are going to consider separate living trusts, separate LLCs, in a way that those entities can then form a general partnership, or form a separate general partnership so that the farm and ranch, the business of the farm and ranch can continue on, and the programs that it's working within can continue to be utilized. So those are kind of the common ways that most estate planners will look at farm and ranch succession planning. So really the key things are living trusts and LLCs. That's what most estate planners are going to utilize. But when you're talking to estate planners, you're going to want to talk to them about how that would work within the programs that you're utilizing, especially if you're using some of the FSA programs. Depending on the type of entity and structure you put together, you may need to make sure that those will comply. So make sure that when you're interviewing or talking to an estate planning lawyer for your succession plan, that you ask those questions. Those are really important questions to ask, and you need to make sure that you get a good understanding. And we are always looking at those issues ourselves. We ask a lot of questions from our clients about them. So make sure that that's on your list to consider. The other thing that you want to consider is how do we want to structure our land? Do we want to maybe look at the land as a separate piece of the estate planning? Do we want to look at the business side as a separate piece of estate planning? There's a lot of things that you can consider, and you can get pretty creative when it comes down to it. But again, these are questions that you should be asking when you meet with an estate planning attorney to help you with your farm and ranch succession plan. You're also going to want to consider any CRP payments or that you might be entitled to if you've got any land in CRP. I know my grandpa had land in CRP, and so that was part of the plan as to how to deal with that. So make sure you ask questions about that. You also want to ask questions about the estate tax, and you want to talk to your estate planning attorney about strategies related to that. You want to make sure that you have a clear understanding and a clear picture about what are the thresholds for paying estate taxes? How are those taxed? What does that look like? How can you maximize the basis step up? How can you protect from cost of long-term care? These are all really good questions to ask your estate planning attorney. You also want to look at conservation easements, annuities, irrevocable trust. Are there any of those that might be applicable? Sometimes farm and ranches have easements that have been placed on their properties. There might be some old trusts that might still be in place from previous generations. We've actually seen that in our firm, where families have been continuing to operate the farm or the ranch under an old trust. And so, we want to look at that. We want to look to see how it's currently being managed and run. And you're going to want to take all of those documents in when you meet with your estate planning attorney so that you can ask a lot of questions about what are the implications of having these in place? How's that going to affect my own estate planning? And what do we need to do to make sure we're complying with all the rules and regulations? And if there's any existing trusts or easements, are we complying with those? Those are going to be pretty critical. So, questions, these are ideas of questions that you should probably be thinking about and that you should be asking when you're thinking about hiring an estate planning attorney. A couple of other things that you can be thinking about when you're thinking about farm and ranch succession planning is gifting trusts, and you can think about possibly how you can utilize maybe LLCs, separate LLCs, when you're thinking about your operation. Can your operation, how can that look? Can it be separated into several different entities that might make sense, especially if you've got multiple children? Those are some questions that you could be asking your estate planning attorney. When we're talking about children, one of the things that always comes up is equal is not always fair. So how do we deal with that? We've got, do we have a land owning entity? Do we have an operating entity? That could be one of the solutions. We could leave a land to a child who's going to take care of the farm, or maybe leave a life insurance policy to another child who maybe has other interests. So those are a couple of things that you can ask your estate planning attorney about. If you're taking notes, write those down. Ask your estate planning attorney what they would advise based on your specific situation. And so we want to make sure that you're getting all the information you need so that you can ask smart questions and understand your options, because every situation is different, every family is different. And so maybe your farm works for a trust, maybe it doesn't. Maybe your ranch should be in an LLC and maybe it shouldn't. There's no way to know and understand unless you really think about your operation. I would challenge you to think about, what are your goals? What are your long-term goals? What do you really want to see happen? What are the values that you have in your farm or your ranch? Do you want to keep it in the family forever? That may not be possible. Do you want to pass it down to generation after generation? Maybe that is possible. Well, how would you do it? And a really good start is to talk to an estate planning attorney who understands and can walk you through the process and really can get a good understanding of your operation. So if you're thinking about meeting with an estate planning attorney, make sure to bring in all of your documents. Bring in information about the business side, because an estate planning attorney is going to need to understand, okay, how are your crops being managed? How are you selling them? How are you handling your livestock? What do the contracts look like? What's been the business plan? Is that a plan you'd like to continue with moving forward? And on the land side, how is the land being managed? Is the land owned? How is the land currently owned? And does that make sense with your goals and your visions for the future? So make sure you write these things down, because when you go in and talk to an estate planner, it's going to help you and your attorney to understand your goals and be able to start putting a plan in place that makes the most sense. You also need to make sure you take in all of your life insurance policies, any investments you have. Make sure you gather all of your documents that relate to your entire picture, because an estate planning attorney is going to need to know what that looks like. And he or she is going to need to know what the values of those are. What are the values of the land? What's the values of your livestock, your crops, any annuities or IRAs, investments that you have? All of those paint the big picture of your estate and your plan, and will help to really put together the best plan for you. We'd also, when we have clients come in to see us, we also want to know what are their kids doing, and what's the plan on passing this down? Do the kids have any interest in the property or the land, or are there grandkids who have an interest? And how do you see that happening in the future? Because if you can explain and articulate to us what your goals are and your visions for your family, your kids and your grandkids, to pass on your heritage, it's going to help your estate planning attorney understand the best path forward for you. So I hope these tips provide you with some understanding about some of the questions you should be asking, things you should be thinking about yourself when you're starting to put together that plan, and questions that you should be asking your attorneys. There's a lot of complexities when it comes to planning for farms and ranches, and so it's always good to be prepared. Make sure you've got a lot of questions, and make sure you get a great plan put in place that meets your goals and puts a succession plan in place that's going to carry on your heritage and your hard work to the future generations.